I'm Angela.
And I'm Paige.
Join us as we dive into our obsession with true crime, history, and mysterious stories. We'll explore the intricate details of the corrupt, the cruel, and the calculating.
We assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this episode. The Corrupt Podcast is based on the facts and our opinions of the case. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Corrupt Podcast.
5 of the 10 Sodder children disappeared after a Christmas Eve 1945 fire at their home. Decades later, their fate is still a mystery. Were they killed in a fire, kidnapped, or murdered? The Sodder family believed the 5 missing children survived the fire, but despite the decades-long hunt for answers, no definitive information was ever found.
Welcome to our 5 days of corrupted Christmas. For Christmas, one of the best gifts you could give us is to leave a review on any one of our platforms. Spotify, Apple, and Facebook all have review options. We're incredibly thankful for every listen, and the recommendations really help to get our podcast out there.
You can join the Corrupt crew over at patreon.com/corruptpodcast.
George Sodder was born Giorgio Sadu in Tula, Sardinia on November 23, 1895. At 13 years old, George and an older brother immigrated from Italy through Ellis Island. In the United States, George changed his name to George Sodder. The older brother turned around and returned to Sardinia, leaving George on his own.
George was a hard worker, and he found a job in Pennsylvania carrying supplies and water to the railroad workers. Still a teenager on his own, George then moved to Smithers, West Virginia, to work as a driver hauling dirt. Around 1922, George walked into a store called the Music Box and met the store owner's daughter, Jenny Cipriani. Jenny's family had also immigrated from Italy to the United States when Jenny was a toddler. They were married on November 4th, 1922, and over the next 27 years would welcome 11 children.
George and Jenny moved to Scarborough, West Virginia, and George was working as a taxi driver in 1923. The same year, on August 15th, their first son, John Frederick Sodder, was born. The following year, on September 4th, 1924, a second son, Joseph Samuel Sodder, was born.
Their first daughter, Marion Sodder, was born on March 6, 1926. Then another son, George Sodder Jr., who went by Ted, was born on September 30th, 1929. Maurice Antonio Sodder was born July 8th, 1931, and Martha Lee was born on January 22nd, 1933.
The expanding family moved 25 miles south into a 2-story, 7-bedroom frame house in Fayetteville, West Virginia in 1935. Fayetteville seemed perfect for the family. There was a large Italian immigrant population, and it was located close to the gorgeous Appalachian Mountains. The area was very countryside, with a population of less than 2,000 people. The town of Fayetteville is located in southern central West Virginia and runs adjacent to New River Gorge National Park. The property, purchased only 2 miles outside of town, was 7.5 acres and is located on what is now called Beckwith Road.
The house had a basement, first floor, and upstairs. The living room, kitchen, George's office, and George and Jenny's rooms were all on the first floor. The stairway to the second floor was in the middle of the home. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms on opposite sides of the hall. The boys shared a room, and the girls were in another room. George began his own trucking company, hauling dirt and coal from the West Virginia mines and around the Fayetteville area. Jenny managed the company books. George would run the company from his home office and maintenance the 6 heavy trucks that the company owned.
The Sodders were a well-respected middle-class family. The only complaint anyone seems to have about the family was how outspoken George was on the topic of Benito Mussolini. Paige, can you explain who Benito Mussolini is, please?
Benito Mussolini was an Italian dictator that really split Italy at this time. It was a love him or hate him type situation. two immigrants who had left Italy, it seems like they were maybe more in love with him than people living in Italy through some of the things that he was doing.
Okay.
For most of our story, though, it's really unique because he dies in a really horrific way. I believe he's shot, and then him and his mistress are hung up in the square for days on end because people were really, I don't want to say excited to see him go, but they were happy that he was no longer in charge of Italy. This is World War II.
So he wasn't a good guy.
He was not a great guy, no.
But George thought he was.
George saw it straight. George was like, Benito Mussolini is not good for Italy. He's not good for the world. But to the people in the community in West Virginia, they thought he was amazing. They thought Benito was the best thing since sliced bread. He's doing amazing things for Italy. Turns out George was pretty spot on. But his opinion was very unpopular at this point.
Thank you for explaining that. Let's be honest here. George wasn't wrong, but to his small town Italian community in West Virginia, his opinion wasn't the popular one. In Italy, Mussolini's supporters were proud of the security they thought he brought after World War I. Even after Mussolini's death in April 1945, George's opinion was still an unpopular one. If you thought George and Jenny were done making babies, think again. Louis Enrico was born on December 30th, 1935. Almost 2 years later, Jenny Irene was born on September 19th, 1937. And then two final daughters were born, Betty Dolly on March 4th, 1940, and Sylvia Ann on March 5th, 1942.
By Christmas Eve 1945, the Sodder family had 9 of their 10 children at home with them. Originally, it was thought that both of the oldest sons would make it back for Christmas. John had been serving in the military during World War II, and he arrived back home the week before Christmas. The second oldest son, Joe, had also served in World War II, but he was held up and wouldn't arrive home for Christmas. Joe not making it for the holidays definitely put a damper on the reunion plans. That Christmas of 1945, John was 23 years old, Marion was 17 years old, Ted was 16, Maurice was 14, Martha was 12 years old, Louis was 9 years old, Jenny was 8, Betty was 5 years old, and Sylvia was 3 years old. They were all in the home that evening.
George, John, and Ted worked on Christmas Eve, making deliveries around the area using the trucks that were kept at the property. Marion worked at a store downtown, and she was the last one to return home that night. Arriving at approximately 9:30 p.m., Marion brought home gifts for her younger sisters. Martha, Jenny, and Betty were so excited, and they begged their mom to stay up late to play with their new toys and listen to the radio.
Their mother, Jenny, agreed with the condition that the kids also still needed to do their chores before bed. These chores included bringing in the cows, feeding the chickens, locking the door, pulling the curtains, and turning off the lights. Martha, Jenny, and Betty also had to go to bed when Maurice and Louis decided to go to bed. The 5 younger kids agreed, and Marion, John, and Ted decided they would stay downstairs with the younger kids as well. Sylvia was still sleeping in a crib in Jenny and George's room, so around 10 p.m., Jenny, George, and Sylvia headed to their ground level bedroom.
Sometime between 11:15 to 11:30 p.m., John and Ted headed upstairs to bed. At 12:30 a.m., the phone rang in George's office. Jenny ran for the phone across the hall. A woman on the other line asked for a man who Jenny didn't know. Based on noises in the background, Jenny thought it was someone calling from a party. She also remembered that the woman had a very distinctive laugh.
Before going back to bed, Jenny checked over the bottom floor. She saw Marion asleep on the couch. She also noticed that the blinds had not been closed and the lights were still on. Jenny assumed the younger kids were upstairs in bed, so she turned off the lights and headed back to bed. She did not check to confirm if the outside chores had been completed or if the children were actually upstairs in bed.
At around 1 a.m., Jenny was woken up again, this time by the sound of something hitting, then rolling down the tin roof. She didn't hear anything else and rolled over and went back to sleep. Later, Jenny would report that it sounded like a rock hitting their tin roof, and she disregarded the sound as wind. Just 30 minutes later, Jenny was awakened by the smell of smoke. George's office was on fire, possibly originating from the telephone or desk area in the right corner of the room. George and Jenny yelled up the stairs to the kids. Then we have two different accounts of the next events. In John's first statement to the state police, just 8 hours after the fire, John says that he awakened his brother Ted, and they went to shake the other kids in their room before rushing downstairs to help put out the fire.
Now, in his second statement, John said that he called for the other children from across the hall. He's sure that he heard a response from one of his brothers before he ran down the stairs to help put out the fire. Something to think about here is that John spoke with multiple newspapers and law enforcement agencies after the fire, and only one time it is reported that he went across the hallway and actually shook them awake. Every other time, he is quoted saying they yelled across the hallway to wake them up, and then John and Ted rushed down the stairs.
Yeah, I don't know. I was maybe thinking it could have been like an honest mistake. You know, the statement of shaking the kids awake, it's not long after the fire had started or the smoke was filling up the house. John could have been scrambled, and so he spoke what he thought he should have done, but he never did. Nobody knows because we're not in that moment, you know?
You have to think, too, that he's 23 years old and he's returning from World War II. So the hell that he would have been waking up to every day, being in the military during the war, it's completely possible that, yeah, he woke up and just was like war times, like, oh my gosh, I gotta go, and just reacted. So, like, is it possible that he knew later that he should have gone and shaken the kids and he was ashamed of it? So maybe he said that and then later he changes his story. Or maybe it's like playing a game of telephone where somebody tells somebody something and somebody tells something, and then the story gets slightly altered and somehow he's shaking the kids awake. But in actuality, he never even went to the room. He just yelled across the hall, hey, there's a fire. He ran down the stairs thinking they were going to be able to put the fire out. And that's not what happened.
Yeah, because in the second statement, was his brothers and sisters already gone at that point? Like, he could have been flustered about the whole thing, retraced his steps and was like, wait, did I do this or didn't I? But yeah, absolutely. I think him being in the war was a definite part in the mix here.
Absolutely. The fire was spreading fast throughout the house. John and Ted escaped the fire, and it was already so hot that their hair was singed on the way through. George and Jenny ran through the kitchen and onto the back porch. Marion, who had been sleeping on the couch, ran to her parents' room, snatched Sylvia from her crib, and ran to safety through the front door. The stairway that was located in the middle of the home was completely engulfed in flames by the time Jenny, George, John, Ted, Marion, and Sylvia had made it out of the house.
From outside of the home, the family called for the children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, but received no response. In a 1979 Williamson Daily News article, Jenny said,
"We called, we cried, we hollered, we screamed, but nobody came out."
Fearing that the kids were stuck in the upstairs bedrooms, George went for the ladder that was always leaning on the side of the house, but the ladder wasn't there. George then thought to drive his truck beside the house to stand on it and gain access to the upstairs. But when George and John tried to start both trucks, neither would start. Later, George stated he choked the trucks too much and he flooded them.
George tried to scoop water from their rain barrels, but it was December and the barrels were frozen solid. He then smashed windows with his arms, badly slicing himself in the process, but he still couldn't get into the house. Marion had taken off running to the neighbor, Mr. and Mrs. Davis's house. The neighbors attempted to call for the fire department, but couldn't get an operator to respond to connect the call.
Another neighbor, Thomas Smith, saw the fire and he tried to call for the fire department from a tavern. Just like the prior attempt, neither could get a hold of the operator. Thomas took it a step further and drove into town to track down the fire department, Chief Forrest J. F.J. Morris. Chief Morris had worked at the department for years, but apparently he had never learned to drive the fire truck. Convenient.
Yep.
So he initiated a phone tree, calling one fire department volunteer after another. I mean, at that point, FJ, just take your chances and drive the damn truck.
Agreed.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, I didn't learn to drive the fire truck. Well, too damn bad. There's a house on fire. Learn.
It's 2 miles down the road, and it's rural West Virginia. Who are you going to hit? Get in the truck and try, man.
Yeah. Common sense here, FJ. Thomas drove back to the home, but found it mostly collapsed already. Reports vary, but it was estimated that it would have taken between 20 to 30 minutes for the entire house to go up in flames and up to 45 minutes to burn to the ground.
Interestingly, just 40 years ago, you had 17 minutes to escape a house fire. In 2025, we have just 3 minutes to get out. That is due to synthetic materials in our homes. Everything is made of synthetics. Your carpet, your couch, mattresses. Compared to the 1970s and 80s when cotton, solid wood, and other natural materials were used, a living room could slowly burn for 30 minutes before becoming engulfed. The speed of fire is not the biggest problem. That would actually be the poisonous gases that the synthetic finishings give off as they burn. The poisonous smoke inhalation from carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide is the leading cause of death in house fires today. This is your reminder to check your smoke alarms monthly, replace the batteries, and replace the units every 10 years.
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting. I never once thought of synthetic materials being the reason fires burn so quickly and poison us. Not once.
I don't feel like it's information that's shared enough. And as I stumbled upon it doing the research for this episode, I was like, we should probably have a public service announcement about how fast this can kill you within 3 minutes. And then the poisonous gas, nobody's talking about this.
No wonder why when there's a fire, like more than likely just people die. And I always wonder, I'm like, well, if, like a fire were to start in my home, I'll be making sure we be getting out, like we're busting through doors, windows, whatever we can to get out of there. But really, you don't think of you're just not conscious and you burn.
Yeah, the smoke inhalation is going to get you first. It's also something important if you have children in your house to make sure that you have a spot that you designate in the event of a fire. Where's your meetup spot? So if you're not doing that already, even if you don't have small children, it's just you and your husband. Do you guys have a meetup spot if you get out of the house?
Okay, like outside of the home.
Yes, not in the house. Get out of the house.
You were thinking inside the home. I'm like, what if that part's on fire, though?
No, outside. We're meeting by the mailboxes. I don't care. Pick a tree. You've got a maple tree out back. Pick a spot for you and people that live in your home to meet at in the event of a fire.
I also heard this from a firefighter once, but closing your doors can help so much with like fire inhalation and the smoke getting in your room. It like the door would block it if you have the door closed. So it's smart to close your doors, when you go to bed, I guess.
Because it blocks out some of that toxic smoke before it can even get to you. And in theory, your alarms go off first.
Yep.
But even then, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you to all of our firefighters. Thank you for your service.
Yes, thank you for keeping us safe.
FJ, not so much, but thank you to the others.
I think Thomas here could have even just hopped in the truck and drove him. Hop in, Thomas. You are the volunteer firefighter today. Drive the truck.
They dropped the ball.
They did. Also, keep in mind that it is Christmas. So people are out partying and spending time with their families, and nobody was staffed for an emergency. It's a volunteer fire department.
This is true.
At the same time that the house was on fire, Jeff Adkins and Lonnie Johnson went to the Sodder property, but not to help, to rob them.
Jerks.
The men stole a set of chain blocks from a garage building and threw them over an embankment. Lonnie would also admit later that he cut the phone line because he thought it was a power line. Lonnie would plead guilty to charges and be fined $25. Jeff joined the military to avoid punishment and never served time for the theft. Now, on the note of Lonnie cutting the phone line because he thought it was a power line. First off, he was looking to electrocute himself here. But if he was stealing the chain blocks to remove an engine from the garage, why would he need to kill the power? It's 12 to 1 a.m. Like, the story just doesn't even ring true on why they were there. I also wonder if they used the ladder and that's why it wasn't leaning on the house for George to find.
Yep.
If they moved the ladder, that would have been a life-saving device that George needed. So he really should have been charged with something much heavier than a $25 fine.
Yeah, I agree. This should have been investigated further. Something does not add up here. Even though it was only a 2.5-mile drive from the Sodder home to the station, the fire department wouldn't arrive at the house until 8 a.m. on Christmas Day. The Fayetteville Fire Department didn't have a siren in 1945. The process was much slower than today, requiring a call to the operator who contacted the fire department chief, and then each volunteer firefighter would be contacted one by one.
By 8 a.m., the house was a total loss of just ash and debris, and the 5 Sodder children had disappeared. The fire department soaked the entire site with water, putting out the fire that was essentially just embers by that point.
Think of how stupid that would have looked. They were literally watering the residue of the house.
Hours after the fire that's 2 miles down the road.
It's just like, what's the point? Do you not see it turn to ash?
Yeah, it's a pretty sad situation. And they're trying to find their 5 missing children. At 9:15 a.m., 2 officers with the Department of Public Safety, which would now be the West Virginia State Police, spoke with George, Jenny, and John about the events.
By 10 a.m., the fire department, Department of Public Safety, John and Ted had searched the area for only 2 hours. George and Jenny assumed their children were dead, but during the Christmas Day informal 2-hour search, no human remains were located. Fire Chief Morris, aka FJ, recommended the family gather 5 piles of ashes and use that for the burial service. How thoughtful of him.
Isn't it?
George said he would remove the debris and fill the entire basement with dirt, which Chief Morris agreed with. However, the state fire marshal heard this and told George to preserve the scene and not to fill the site in until their inspection was complete.
On December 26th, the fire department investigation concluded. The children were determined to be dead, and death certificates were issued, with their cause of death listed as from fire or suffocation. The fire marshal had not finished their investigation or changed their stance on leaving the site undisturbed, but George and Jenny couldn't stand seeing it anymore. So on Saturday, December 29th, either Jenny's brother, Jimmy Cipriani, or George himself used a bulldozer to fill the basement in with 5 feet of dirt. On January 2nd, 1946, memorial services would be held. George and Jenny were too distraught to attend, but the surviving children were present.
This seemed off to me. A parent is supposed to be strong for your children, show up and be there for your other kids, you know? Like, I understand their aspect of their other children are gone, or coming to the conclusion that they are gone, maybe, is why they didn't go. But if your other kids are going, like, be an adult and go with them, you know, like, and support them too.
It's a mess. Like, it's a terrible situation. They've lost 5 of their children, and they lost everything that they own. You know, their home is gone. So I can see it from both perspectives.
The State Fire Marshal and State Department of Safety agreed that the children had died in the fire. Officially, their cause of death was listed as undetermined. Just one day after the fire, John would be quoted in the Beckley Post-Herald saying,
"I think somebody set the fire."
Soon the entire family believed that the children had been kidnapped, and the fire was started to cover the kidnapping. Some interesting information came to light that would support the family's opinion that the children were alive. A telephone repairman told the family that their phone line had been cut and not burned. Not only had it been cut, but someone had cut it 14 feet high and 2 feet away from the telephone pole.
Which brings us back to Lonnie and his statement about cutting the phone line during the theft. Why would he cut it 14 foot in the air, especially a line that he thought was a power line?
If it was 14 feet in the air, Lonnie would have to use a ladder.
Exactly. Initially, the fire department determined the cause of the fire was electrical, which had started somewhere around the phone area in George's office. If the cause of the fire had been due to an electrical fire, the power should have gone off, but it remained on as the family ran for help. The Christmas lights had even been still lit during the early stages of the fire.
Can you explain to me why the power should have gone off in the event of an electrical fire? Like, can we unpack that a little bit? Because I feel like if a fire were to happen, an electrical fire, I don't necessarily think it would take all the electricity of the house out. You know what I mean?
I think if it happens at your meter, it would.
Okay. But in this case, it was like his phone, right? Or like in his office.
I think if you have fire at your panel or maybe your meter, then it would kill the power throughout your house.
Right.
But if, I don't know, a lamp catches on fire, I don't think that's going to cause our home to lose power.
Exactly.
Months earlier, in October 1945, a homeowner's insurance salesman visited the home, and he tried to get George to increase the insurance coverage on the home from $1,500 to $1,750. George declined increasing the coverage, and the salesman reportedly told George,
"Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." Yeah, that seemed like a direct threat right there.
Absolutely. There are two alternative stories here. One is that the salesman visiting the home was actually for life insurance instead of homeowner's insurance. The other story, involving a person who threatened the home and children, may have been someone that worked with George and co-signed on the 1935 home loan. This person has many names, sometimes called Judalo or Genitoni. He's mentioned many times by online sleuths, but we couldn't find any supporting evidence about him or to support this theory. Either way, the story goes that this man co-signed on the original home loan for $1,500. But when George started his own company, the two became on bad terms. It was this man who either threatened the fire or sent the insurance salesman to try to get George to increase the insurance value to $1,750.
I'm just going to call him Jude Law. Seemed to fit.
I searched through so many news articles looking for this person. You just can't find any reputable sources with an actual name other than that guy that George possibly worked with who co-signed on the loan. So take that one for what you will. Internet sleuths kind of take it and run with it, that this man was the one at fault. He did something.
It seems like a pretty legit story. I would for sure feel like he was connected with that fire somehow.
You have money in play. You know, he's asking for the house insurance to be raised. You've got politics in play because he's talking about Mussolini. And then you've got some bad blood because he worked with George and they broke off on bad terms. This guy would have all the motive.
On another occasion, someone looking for trucking work had wandered to the rear of the house and told George that the fuse box in the rear of the home would cause a fire someday. George had assured the person the entire home had been rewired when the electric stove was installed. George had even called the electric company to confirm the safety. The older children also noticed someone parking along the state route and watching the younger Sodder children when they arrived home after school in the weeks before the fire.
The family disagreed with the determination that the fire was electrical. George believed that the fire was arson and related to the Italian mafia due to his opinions on Benito Mussolini.
Just days after the fire, Sylvia picked up a hard rubber object in the yard. The family concluded that it was the remains of a napalm pineapple bomb and was most likely what Jenny had heard hitting and rolling on the roof at 1 a.m. John and Joe had been in World War II, and would have been familiar with this type of bomb as it was used in World War II warfare.
A bus driver would also come forward to say that he had driven through late on Christmas Eve or the early morning hours of Christmas Day and saw balls of fire being thrown on the house by multiple people, and he didn't call for help. Then there were the sightings of the children throughout the eastern United States. A little girl told the Sodders that she had seen one of the 5 missing children looking out of a car window while the fire was still in progress. On a different occasion, a woman claimed to have seen the children in a passing car while the fire was in progress.
A woman in a tourist shop between Fayetteville and Charleston not only saw the children, but served them breakfast the morning after the fire. This witness claimed that there was a car in the shop parking lot with Florida plates on it as well. By 1963, George and Jenny had a signed affidavit from a hotel owner in Charleston. The witness saw 4 of the children at this hotel about 2 or 3 days after the fire. The witness made a formal statement to law enforcement.
The children were accompanied by 2 women and 2 men, all of Italian extraction. I do not remember the exact date. However, the entire party did register at the hotel and stayed in a large room with several beds. They registered about midnight. I tried to talk to the children in a friendly manner, but the men appeared hostile and refused to allow me to talk to these children. One of the men looked at me in a hostile manner. He turned around and began talking rapidly in Italian. Immediately, the whole party stopped talking to me. I sensed that I was being frozen out, so I said nothing more. They left early the next morning.
5 other witnesses saw the children later in Cortez, Florida.
Different people. 5 different people saw them, and all sightings pointed to Florida. Not weird?
That's very weird, and that's too many sightings to ignore.
Agreed. A newspaper article from a year later, on December 26, 1946, reported that Jenny and George placed lighted wreaths on the burial site in memory of their 5 children. They also hired Detective George Swain from the American Detective Agency. In early 1947, George and Jenny saw an article with photos of school children in New York. They felt that one of the children in the photo looked just like Betty, so they traveled to New York and attempted to speak to the child. The parents of the little girl refused them access, and the Sodders were sent home without answers.
I don't blame the parents one bit about this. You want to see my little girl because you think she's yours? Nope. Not gonna happen.
I know. You can, again, see it from both angles there because the parents, they could have met them at a police department or something, but I'm with you. If somebody comes up and says, hey, that's my kid, you're going to be like, nope, you're not going to be around them at all. We're done here.
Yeah, because if it's your kid, if it's your actual kid and you know that that's your kid, like you'd be like, why am I wasting time with this? But
yep, just actually stay away from us.
Yeah. George and Jenny then sent a letter to the FBI requesting assistance in the investigation for their children. The FBI responded, saying that the investigation was a local matter, but they did offer to help if Fayetteville police and fire departments would agree, but both departments declined the FBI's help. The Sodders hired a new private detective, C.C. Tinsley. The investigator discovered that the insurance salesman who threatened George was a member of the coroner's jury that voted the fire was accidental in nature.
Super suspicious there. That's a lot of overlap. When have we ever heard of a local department declining the FBI's assistance? Only in situations where something shady is going on.
Yeah, super suspicious. Did they not look at the connections here either? There's a lot, like you said, a lot of overlap there. Could have been avoided. Later in 1947, Reverend Frame, who presided over the memorial services for the children, heard a rumor about a heart being found at the burn site. The Reverend contacted Chief Morris, who confirmed he had found a human heart on Christmas Day, but had placed it in a metal box and buried it in the basement.
George and C.C. Tinsley dug until they found the box in the basement and took it to Harold Gay, a funeral home in Montgomery, West Virginia, on July 1st, 1947. Now, Harold, he determined that this liver was possibly from a cow, but that it also didn't have smoke damage.
Why would the liver of a cow be placed in a metal box?
And buried in the basement? Harold put embalming chemicals on the liver and placed the box on the back porch for pickup for an official evaluation. It was from the back porch that the liver disappeared, either by theft or as the Montgomery trash collection thought it was refuge and picked up the small box with the regular trash collection. Something strange is that the liver was fresh looking and without smoke damage. And this was July 1947. That's like 18 months later in the dead of the summer. Conspiracy theory here is that Chief Morris had planted a beef liver at the scene and then spread the rumor about finding a heart on Christmas 1945. In this way, he was hoping the Sodders would finally agree their children were dead and stop pestering him.
That makes complete sense that he would do that. If not him, somebody.
It's just another way for him to weasel out of his job. Like he's over them pestering him, forgetting to be in their shoes for a moment, that they are trying to handle the loss of 5 children.
Jenny refused to believe that the children could have died without leaving bones, so she conducted her own private experiments. Jenny attempted to burn chicken bones, beef joints, pork chop bones to ash, but every time she was left with bones remaining. Jenny then spoke with a crematorium employee who advised that after 2 hours and 2,000 degrees, some bones would still remain. Jenny also read an article about another family with 7 people who had died in a house fire, but all of their remains had been found. Jenny knew that the fire that burned through their home took much less time, and that some of the appliances in the basement were still recognizable after the fire. This led to more suspicion that the children were not in the home at the time of the fire.
Another newspaper article, this one from 1948 or 1949, summarized 5 reasons why George and Jenny felt their children were still alive.
There were nothing identified as a human body found in the embers. Telephone wires leading into the house had been cut. The stepladder, which was kept in an immediate available space, was found 75 to 80 feet over an embankment near the house. For a few days before the blaze, a man was seen watching the children come home from school, and finally, because 3 days after the fire, 3 men and a woman came to where the family was staying and asked to see their babies, as is to learn if the parents suspected anything.
This is taken directly from the article, and some of the items are worded in a way that I find interesting. They don't say no human remains were found, but nothing is identified as a human body. And I think that's because a beef liver had been found, but the family didn't even keep beef liver in their house. Then the liver was put on the back porch and disappeared. This was also the first time I heard of the 3 people visiting the family. Do we think it was the kidnappers?
Possibly. Also, Lonnie and Jeff threw the chain blocks over an embankment, and here they also find the ladder over an embankment. Was it the same embankment? Because wholeheartedly, I believe they were taken.
Just a lot of shenanigans going on. Like Lonnie even being there at the time, that's just jumping on like an opportunity that you shouldn't have known was coming. Like, unless you knew that the house fire was about to happen, right?
Yeah. And it could have been a group of people working together for this too. Because I mean, there's 5 kids that went missing here. That's a lot of kids.
That's a lot of kids.
Like, you think one person can kidnap 5 kids? Probably not. Has to be maybe at least 2.
I don't know. You grab Betty, you grab the littlest, and you threaten the olders with the littlest child. You could easily, these are children, and they're the youngest children.
What was the oldest again?
The oldest was Maurice, who was 14. So of those 5 children, Maurice is 14, Martha's 12, Louis is 9, Jenny's 8, and Betty's 5.
Work in numbers. Just grab them and tag them.
No, I agree. It would be very hard to take 5 unless you're threatening them in some way.
Yeah. Private Detective George Swain believed the children may have been kidnapped and put up for adoption. He expanded on this idea by saying the children could have been lured from the house by a promise of a Christmas party.
Which takes you back to that strange phone call that Jenny received with a possible party in the background.
Yeah, that's a weird connection there. On August 18th, 1949, George, along with Detective Swain and a pathologist from Washington, D.C., named Oscar Hunter, brought a bulldozer in to uncover the burned area of the house.
Using the bulldozer, they dug all the way to the basement. 6 human bones were found. The bones were sent away to Marshall Newman, a specialist at the Smithsonian Institute for review. The report confirmed 4 of the bones were in fact the lumbar vertebrae of a human. The estimated age of the person was between 16 to 23 years old. Even though these bones were found in the basement, they showed no signs of fire damage. The pathologist admitted that it was possible for the remains to be of 14-year-old Maurice, but he felt it highly unlikely since the bones showed greater skeletal maturation than a typical 14-year-old. The other 2 bones were possibly from a child's hand. The Sodders were not convinced. The pathologist and the Smithsonian report both admitted that the skulls and femur bones of the children should have remained at the very least, but none were found.
That kind of makes sense with the whole cemetery and finding the bones things.
And they didn't keep track of the cemetery at all?
I don't know about you, but I watch them Western movies, and they just, when they kill each other off, they just bury them where they die. You know what I mean? It could have been one of those instances, you know.
I agree. They could have been a cemetery from the 1800s, or maybe it just happened to be people that lived at the property before, or maybe Native Americans, and they just...
Yeah.
But what are the odds that those bones would end up in the basement? Just seems so unlikely.
I guess it's hard for me to picture it. So the basement is still intact, or is it not intact?
I think at this point, it's been a basement, it's been rubble, it's been backfilled over, and now it's dug up again.
But it's in the basement area.
Yes, I think it's where the basement would have been, and maybe you could still see the blocks of the basement. I'm sure some part of the foundation remained. Mm-hmm. And some part of that foundation might still be there today.
Could have been also one of the guys or whoever it was that helped the other person kidnap the children. It could have been like somebody could have murdered him and then just put his bones there or put his body there.
Left him there.
Yep.
It's possible.
He's probably like a 22-year-old boy helping out.
Somebody that saw too much. If you're believing the Italian mafia train of thought, then yeah, somebody who saw too much or was involved too much, and they killed him and left their body there.
Yeah. In September 1949, Detective Swain quit the case. He stated,
"Since the basement of the home was excavated on August 18th of this year, under the supervision of a competent pathologist from Washington, D.C., who has reported that the remains found were human bones, it has become my duty to accept these findings. As I see it now, the question is not whether the children perished in the flames, but what became of the bones following the fire."
2 hearings were opened, but sadly were closed as the governor deemed the case handled and advised the Sodders that their search was hopeless. On December 29, 1950, a final baby, Michael Sodder, was born. Sadly, Michael only lived for hours.
The Sodder family history usually lists only 10 children, but we did find Michael's death certificate, listing George Sodder as his father and Jenny Cipriani Sodder as his mother. Michael's death certificate says premature departure of the placenta and lack of oxygen as his cause of death. In September 1953, a billboard was placed at the fire site. The billboard read, "What was the fate of our children? Kidnapped, murdered, or burned?" and offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to the recovery of one or all 5 of their children. The billboard was built right into a small hill beside the Sodder family home. In the summer, Jenny planted flowers in the memorial garden. By 1963, the family had increased the reward to $10,000. You know that I love to figure out how much that $10K was in 1963 and what it would be today. So today, that reward would be close to $110,000.
Wow.
That's a massive reward. And still, no one came forward.
In a January 12, 1963 interview, George told the Beckley Post Herald newspaper that he believed the children were kidnapped and the house set on fire to cover up the crime. George continued by saying,
"It is inconceivable to the intelligent mind that these children burned in that fire. Only a few who are interested in not having the crime solved persist in saying the children died in the fire."
At the time of the article, Maurice would have been 29 years old, Martha 27, Louis 24, Jenny 22, and Betty 20 years old. The sightings of the children continued for many years. At one point, the Sodders received a letter from a woman in St. Louis, Missouri, saying that Martha was in a convent there. Another woman overheard someone in Texas having an incriminating discussion about a 1945 house fire in West Virginia, and another witness said that the 5 children were living with distant relatives of Jenny's. The family followed up on every single lead, traveling across the country to follow up, but nothing was connected to the real missing children.
Between 1966 to 1969, George and Jenny received a letter with a credible lead. The letter was postmarked from Kentucky. In the envelope was a photo of a man that appeared to be in his 20s. On the back was a handwritten note.
Lois Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Lil Boys, A90132 or 35.
And the Lil Boys looks like maybe like LLIL, boys? The man looked just like Louis. The same dark curly hair, nose, and upward angle to one eyebrow. George and Jenny hired another private detective, but this one took their money and was never heard from again. They truly felt that this man was Louis, but they were also afraid that someone had mailed the letter in secret, so they never revealed the return address that was listed on the envelope. They did update their billboard with the man's photo, hoping that someone would know where Louis was.
The new billboard read,
On Christmas Eve 1945, our home was set afire and 5 of our children, ages 5 through 14, kidnapped. The officials blamed defective wiring, although the lights were still burning after the fire started. The official report stated the children died in the fire. However, no bones were found in the residue, and there was no smell of burning flesh during or after the fire. What was the motive of law enforcement officers involved? What did they have to gain by making us suffer all these years of injustice? Why did they lie and force us to accept those lies?
Then there is an asterisk at the bottom of the sign.
Picture number 6 received in 1967. Louis, one and the same, now in another state.
So that kind of confirms what I had said in the beginning about the whole defective wiring part. She was confirming that the lights were still on after the fire started. So there we go.
Yeah.
The letter was taken to the Attorney General's office, but again, it was ignored as the Attorney General's office doubted that it was legitimate. George passed away at 73 years old on August 16, 1969, without knowing what happened to his 5 young children. The prior year, George had one last interview telling the Associated Press,
It's hard sometimes to get to sleep at night, just wondering about them. After all, if someone wanted to get me, why did they get my family too? He added, It's like hitting a rock wall. We can't go any further. We just don't know what to do.
The family continued searching for answers, and in 1984, John told the Roanoke Times that he believed the fire marshal had either been paid off or told to not push it to investigate fully.
In the same 1979 Williamson Daily News article, Jenny said,
But I still have hope. When I pass away, they can't say that I gave up.
The billboard and the memorial garden remained for 36 years, until after Jenny's death in February 1989. For 44 years, Jenny wore only black clothing to show her pain and mourning. After her death, the billboard was removed and the property sold. The memorial garden has also been removed, and a new home was built at the end of the driveway.
The new owners have the property double fenced, trees are grown up, and parking in front of the property is roped off. It would appear that they don't like visitors.
I'm sure they've had plenty of people knocking and wanting to dig in the yard where the house was.
For sure.
In 2016, Steve Cruikshank, a retired firefighter from the Times West Virginian, said that he suspected the work materials kept in the garage might have acted as an accelerant for the flames. George kept 55-gallon drums of fuel for the work trucks. Combined with covering the site in dirt, George may have accidentally created an oven that led to cremation of the remains. The children and grandchildren continue to search for answers. Of the 11 siblings, Sylvia was the final child fighting for answers before her death at 79 years old in 2021. Sylvia had really been an only child in many ways due to the age gap between Sylvia and the next oldest child at 16 years old, who was Ted. Until her death, Sylvia maintained that her siblings had escaped the fire.
The disappearance of the 5 children continues to be a mystery. There are hundreds of theories and possible outcomes. The first theory is what the Sodder family felt was true, and as the closest people to the situation, I think their theory should hold the most weight. They believe that the children were kidnapped and the fire was arson because of George's opinions about Benito Mussolini. The Sodder family believed that the Sicilian mafia was involved with kidnapping them and were hoping to extort money from George.
Even though George was vocal about his dislike for Mussolini, by Christmas 1945, Mussolini had been dead for months. The war was over, and people were returning home, but others had still lost loved ones. By the end of the war, support for Mussolini was now the unpopular opinion. Something I also get stuck on with this theory is that if the children were kidnapped as a way to extort money from George, why did they never reach out? Like, what did they gain from it? Because they never got the money they were hoping to get, right?
Yeah, I see your point in that.
However, it also takes us to theory number 2.
If the children were kidnapped, they could have been sold to the black market, taken to an orphanage or to Italy. If the children lived, it's safe to assume they must have been threatened and too scared to contact their family in West Virginia. What do you think happened, Paige?
No one wants to think about these 5 children dying in a house fire. However, it is so unlikely that 5 adults never contacted their family years later. What if the younger kids ran to the basement to hide from the fire? They might have been on the lower level and not been heard by the family outside yelling for help. This would explain the human remains found in the basement, possibly Maurice's. The bones were estimated to be between 16 and 23, and we know Maurice was 14 years old, so that's pretty close. In a 2005 interview with NPR, Steve Cruikshank, the retired fire marshal, said that when small children feel heat and smell smoke, they're likely to hide. Specifically, he said, we find them under beds, we find them in closets, we find them crawled up in the bathtub. The younger kids would have had smaller bones, which would be harder to find. And the search conducted the first time was only 2 hours long. Today, this would be something that would take weeks, maybe even months. A part of me really thinks that they ran to the basement to hide, as little children are known to do. And then the dirt was filled over the house and the remains were lost. It does not explain the lack of fire or smoke damage to those bones that were found. I really have no answer for that.
Yeah, the problem that I have with that theory is if they were upstairs and they ran downstairs past the front door to go into the basement.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make, like, I would think a 14-year-old at least would know that. Maybe they got split up. Maybe, in that theory, maybe they did get split up, but.
I know. I'm with you. It doesn't really make, I understand that they say the kids could hide under stuff, but why would you'd have to go down the stairway that's on fire and then keep going down, unless they just thought we're going to hide it out.
Mm-hmm.
But Maurice almost had to be the one to make it to the basement because he's the only bones that were possibly found and maybe a child's hand.
And the fact that they said, like, oh, younger children like to hide, well, they need to account Maurice here too, because he was pretty young, but he was also 14. And we were all 14 once, obviously, but 14-year-olds are they use common sense pretty well most of the time.
More than Betty would have at 5.
Mm-hmm.
I think Betty for sure is the age frame to hide.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
The only way I can justify this is that Maurice took them all to the basement thinking that the adults were going to handle it and they would just stay where it was cooler for a minute and then it would all be okay. It's horrible. I mean, nobody wants to think the worst case scenario here. Nobody wants to think that they died and then the bones were missed.
I think that they were definitely snatched. There's too much going on, too many moving parts between the phone call with the Christmas party, the phone and the power lines, the fire bombs, the ladder, the insurance, Benito Mussolini, the cow liver. It just continues and goes on and on. I think they were kidnapped by a group or even possibly a mafia.
Bring in the mafia back.
I'm bringing in the mafia because it was a huge time for those types of situations, and especially in West Virginia, surprisingly. There was a mafia called the Black Hand, and I think it was around that area, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong. But I'm not saying that's the mafia group that was part of this, but it is a very possible scenario they could have been involved.
So if you think they were kidnapped, where do you think they ended up from there?
Honestly, being that they weren't found today, I believe it was overseas. I believe they were taken, they weren't even in the United States. I believe they were taken overseas and maybe sold or have a life there. Just because if they were within the United States, I feel like they would have been found by now. Because obviously they were all old enough to know their lives beforehand.
That's what I think too. Even Betty at 5, she would remember her mom's name. She would remember her siblings, her dad's name, whatever. We lived in Fayetteville, West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
At 5, it's not like if you were going to kidnap one of them, Sylvia would have been the one.
Yeah.
Right? She's only 3. Even then, you're going to know some things aren't right, but I feel like that's a lot easier than a 5 or a 12-year-old or Maurice is 14. I think I could also, see them being kidnapped. And I know that that's what the family truly believes. So that really, I think, puts the most importance on it because that's what they believed happened. If you're going to kidnap them, though, and you had been sitting there watching their schedule, because remember that guy had been seeing them come home from school, probably saw their schedule when they got home. The perfect time would have been when they went out to do their chores and they were, walking to the barn, walking back. That's your sweet spot of you didn't even need to go in the house. So why not kidnap them and just put them in the car and run? Why set the house on fire? Why, any of it? Cut the phone line.
Yeah.
If they were already out of the house and Marion is sleeping on the couch inside. So it had to have happened when they were out of the house.
That's what I'm saying. Just too many moving parts.
It's revenge.
I feel like it was a constructed thing. Like
it was plotted.
Yeah, very much so. And even with Lonnie and the other guy, they were robbing the place. Seems a little bit coincidental for them to just happen to be there.
Right.
And accidentally cut the phone line and not the power line or whatever it was, vice versa.
I don't know what he thought he was doing there, but that's going to go real bad if you're 14 foot in the air on a metal ladder and you cut the power line.
Yeah. And the whole ladder with the embankment,
Mm-hmm.
Was it the same embankment? It's just, there's too many coincidences that it lines up, but it doesn't. We're missing something.
Yeah, 5 humans.
Oh yeah, obviously, but we're missing a connection to those 5 humans. Yes.
Christmas Eve 2025 marks 80 years since the fire that destroyed the Sodder family home, and one way or another separated the family. If they are alive today, Maurice would be 94 years old. Martha Lee would be 92 years old. Louis, 90 years old. Jenny, 88 years old. And Betty would be 85 years old.
Officially, law enforcement in the state of West Virginia maintains there is no mystery, but that all 5 children perished due to fire or suffocation. A Charleston Gazette article ended with,
"It is the truth, not sympathy, that Mr. and Mrs. Sodder seek. They want to know where their children are, living or dead. The parents shall believe their lost ones are alive until proven dead."
The disappearance of the Sodder children still interests us today because the family still does not know without a doubt if the children are alive or dead.
We would love for you to become part of the Corrupt crew. You can find us on Patreon with multiple tiers and PayPal. This will score you our appreciation and will announce your name in a future episode. Both links are in the episode notes. Case suggestions and feedback can be emailed to us at corruptpod@gmail.com.
The sources for this episode would be listed in the episode notes. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. Don't forget to subscribe to catch our new Corrupt content. Please also leave us a review wherever you're listening to this episode. Bye!
Bye!